In the heart of the countryside, nestled between green hills and golden fields, there lived an old farmer named Samuel. His land stretched as far as the eye could see, but it was clear to anyone passing by that Samuel struggled to make ends meet. The paint on his barn was peeling, the wooden fences sagged with age, and his tractor was a clunky rust bucket that coughed and wheezed every time he tried to start it. The townsfolk often whispered about Samuel when they saw him at the market. Why doesn't he just sell that sorry old farm? Mrs. Jenkins, the baker, would scoff. He's never going to get rich planting potatoes and corn in dirt that dry. Others chimed in with their judgments. He's stubborn, that's what, said one merchant. Too proud to admit he's wasting his time. Samuel heard the whispers. He wasn't deaf to the snickers or blind to the pitying glances people gave him, but he didn't care. This land was his father's and his grandfather's before that. It was where he'd grown up, learned to till the soil, and where he planned to stay until his last day on earth. What most people didn't know was that Samuel wasn't just stubborn, he was kind. Whenever a neighbor was down on their luck, Samuel would quietly show up with fresh produce from his farm or offer a helping hand without asking for anything in return. His humility often went unnoticed, overshadowed by his simple, unpolished life. But kindness and patience weren't enough to stop the drought that hit the region one year. The skies dried up and the crops shriveled under the relentless sun. Samuel's once modest but thriving farm was reduced to dust and despair. He barely had enough to feed himself, let alone sell anything at the market. One particularly scorching afternoon, Samuel drove his rattling tractor to town, hoping to buy just enough seed to try again for the next season. He walked into the general store, his clothes stained with dirt and sweat, and approached the counter. "Afternoon, Mr. Parker," Samuel greeted the store owner politely. "I was wondering if I could get a small sack of seed on credit. I'll pay you back soon as the next harvest comes in." Mr. Parker, a round man with a red face, narrowed his eyes. "Credit, huh?" he sneered. "Sam, you ain't got nothing worth collateral, and honestly, I don't think you'll have a next harvest with that sad excuse for a farm." Several customers within earshot laughed. "Yeah, maybe it's time to hang up the shovel, Sam," one man joked. "You're fighting a losing battle." Samuel's face flushed, but he kept his composure. "I ain't asking for charity, just a little trust," he said firmly. "Trust," Parker scoffed. "Trust don't put food on my table. Sorry, Sam, no deal." Samuel sighed, tipping his worn hat. "Thank you anyway," he said quietly before turning and walking out of the store, the echoes of laughter trailing behind him. Despite the humiliation, Samuel didn't let bitterness take root in his heart. He went back to his farm and did what he always did, worked with whatever little he had, refusing to give up. Little did the townsfolk know that fate and karma were already at work, plotting a twist that none of them could have predicted. Samuel woke up early the next day, his calloused hands preparing the simple tools he needed for the day's work. He stepped outside, greeted by the familiar sight of dew clinging to the blades of grass and the gentle hum of insects starting their day. His farm, modest, yet filled with the fruits of his labor, stood resilient against the challenges nature often hurled at it. The recent drought had left his fields thirsty, the soil cracked and begging for rain. Despite the hardships, Samuel maintained his quiet optimism. He knew life had a way of balancing out, even when times got rough. He hitched his old horse, Daisy, to the wooden cart and made his way down the winding dirt road toward the village market. With a small load of fresh produce and jars of homemade preserves, Samuel hoped to sell enough to cover the feed for Daisy and a few essentials for himself. At the market, colorful stalls lined the street, bustling with vendors calling out their prices and customers haggling for better deals. Samuel's stall was humble compared to the others, but his reputation for honest dealings and quality produce always drew a few loyal customers. As he set up his goods, a familiar face appeared in the crowd, Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly woman who lived on the outskirts of town. She approached Samuel with a warm smile. "Good morning, Samuel," she greeted kindly. "How's the farm holding up?" Samuel tipped his hat. "Mornin', Mrs. Jenkins. Could be better, but we're getting by. He handed her a jar of strawberry preserves. On the house, ma'am. I know how much you like these. Mrs. Jenkins' eyes sparkled with gratitude. You're too kind, Samuel. I was just thinking about making biscuits, and this'll be perfect. She slipped a few coins into his hand despite his protests. You deserve every penny. Hard work shouldn't go unrewarded. As the day went on, Samuel managed to sell most of his produce. Just as he was packing up, a young man in a neatly pressed suit approached. He looked out of place among the rural townsfolk, his polished shoes gleaming under the afternoon sun. Are you Samuel, the farmer? The man asked politely. Samuel wiped his hands on his worn jeans. That'd be me. What can I do for you? The young man extended a business card. I'm Thomas Hayes from Green Tech Solutions. We've been looking for local farmers to partner with. For a sustainable farming initiative, your name came highly recommended. Would you be interested in a meeting? Samuel blinked in surprise. Me? Recommended? By who? Thomas smiled. A mutual friend, Mrs. Jenkins. She spoke very highly of you and your dedication to the land. Samuel's heart swelled with pride. Well, I'd be honored to hear more about it. As they discussed the details, Samuel couldn't help but marvel at the turn of events. What had started as a simple act of kindness had come back to him in the form of an unexpected opportunity. Later that evening, as he sat on his porch watching the sunset, Samuel reflected on the day's events. Life, he realized, had a way of rewarding those who gave without expecting anything in return. The farm still had its challenges, but Samuel knew he wasn't facing them alone. With new possibilities on the horizon, he felt a renewed sense of hope. Kindness, he thought with a smile, truly had a way of coming full circle. Months passed, and the once thriving group of townspeople who had mocked Samuel found themselves in a difficult situation. A long and unexpected drought swept through the region, leaving fields parched and crops withering under the relentless sun. Farmers who had previously looked down on Samuel were now desperate, their lands yielding barely enough to survive. In stark contrast, Samuel's humble farm stood out like an oasis amidst the barren landscape. His decision to invest in soil enrichment techniques, crop rotation, and water-saving methods had paid off immensely. The land he nurtured with care and patience now rewarded him generously. Green stalks of corn stretched toward the sky, lush vegetable patches thrived, and his orchard trees were heavy with fruit. Word of Samuel's thriving farm spread quickly across the town, and soon neighbors who had once ridiculed him found themselves swallowing their pride to seek his help. One crisp morning, Samuel was out tending his flourishing fields when a familiar figure approached hesitantly. It was Mr. Thompson, one of the men who had led the mockery months before. His face was drawn with worry, and his clothes, once pristine, were now worn and dusty. Morning, Samuel, Thompson said, his voice lacking its former arrogance. I was wondering if I might buy some of your corn. My fields are, well, they're empty. Nothing grew this season. Samuel straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. He regarded Thompson with a steady gaze, the memory of the laughter and scorn still fresh in his mind. Must be tough, Samuel said simply. Thompson shifted uncomfortably. It is, real tough. I know I wasn't fair to you back then. We all laughed when we shouldn't have. Guess life has a funny way of teaching lessons. Samuel could have turned him away. He had every right to refuse help to those who had belittled him. But Samuel wasn't the kind of man to let bitterness take root in his heart. You know, Samuel began thoughtfully, the land teaches us things too. Teaches patience, respect, and humility. And when you care for it right, it gives back more than you expect. Thompson hung his head, guilt written across his face. You're right, Samuel. I was wrong. We all were. Samuel nodded slowly. Tell you what, he said. I won't sell you the corn, but I'll give you enough to get by, and I'll show you how to treat your land better for next season. Deal? Thompson's eyes widened in disbelief. You'd do that after everything? Samuel shrugged. Holding on to anger doesn't help anyone. The land gives when you care for it, and I reckon people should do the same. Word of Samuel's generosity spread, and soon other townspeople approached him with apologies and requests for help. True to his nature, Samuel guided them, sharing his knowledge and resources without holding grudges. The very people who had once mocked him learned a lesson far greater than any crop could yield. A lesson in humility, gratitude, and the undeniable truth that karma has a way of balancing the scales. As the town slowly recovered, Samuel's reputation grew, not just as a skilled farmer, but as a man of wisdom and compassion. And in the quiet moments, under the golden glow of the setting sun, Samuel would often smile to himself, knowing that he had chosen the path of kindness when the world had given him every reason not to. Because in the end, karma always came around, and those who sowed goodness, like Samuel, would always reap its rewards.
Thanks for watching, y'all. See you in the next video. Take care.